I left the green and found myself facing the big Waterstones bookshop. Bob and I often popped in there, and the staff there always made a fuss of him. I knew I really was clutching at straws now, but maybe he had had it there for a rough fuse. I was quiet inside the store, and some of the staff were getting ready to shut up for the evening. There were just a few people browsing the shelves. I recognized one of the ladies behind the till. By now I was sweating, breathing heavily, and must obviously have looked agitated. Are you all right? She asked. I've lost Bob. A dog attacked us and Bob ran off. He didn't come in here, didn't he? Did he? Oh no, she said, looking genuinely concerned. I've been here and I've not seen him, but let me ask upstairs. She picked up the phone and dialed to the other department. You haven't seen a cat up there, have you? She said. The slow shake of her head. The fellow told me all I needed to know. I'm really sorry, she said, but if you do see him, we'll make sure to keep him. Thanks, I said. It was only then, as I wandered back out of the Waterstones and into the now dark evening, that it hit me. I've lost him. I was in bits. For the next few minutes, I was in a daze. I carried on walking down Essex Road, but by now I had given up on asking in the cafes, restaurants, and pubs. This was the route we came in every day and went home again every night. When I saw a bus bound for Tottenham, another thought formed in my frazzled mind. He couldn't have, could he? There was an inspector standing at one of the bus stops, and I asked him whether he'd seen a cat getting on a bus. I knew Bob, he was smart enough to do it, but the guy just looked at me like I'd asked him whether he'd seen aliens getting on the but number 73. He, he just shook his head and turned away from me. I knew cats had a great sense of direction and had been known to make long journeys, but there was no way he was going to find his way all the way back to Tottenham. It was a good 3.5 miles through some pretty rough parts of London. We'd never walked that way, we'd only ever done it on the bus. I quickly decided that was simply a non starter. The next half hour or so was a roller coaster of conflicting emotions. One minute I'd convinced myself that he couldn't stray far without being found and identified. Loads of people locally knew who he was, and even if he was found by someone who didn't know him, if they were sensible, they'd see that he was microchipped and would know that all his data was at the National Microchip Center. No sooner had I assured myself of that than a stream of very different consciousness began washing over me as, all of a sudden, a nightmare series of thoughts started pinging away in my head. This might have been what happened 2 years ago. This might have been how had come to end up in my block of flats that spring evening. This might have been the trigger from him to decide it was time to move on again. Inside I was utterly torn. The logical, sensible side of me was saying, "He will be okay, you will get him back." But the wilder, more irritated side of me was saying something much bleaker. It was saying, "He's gone. You won't see him again." I wandered up and down Access Road for the best part of an hour. It was now pitch dark and the traffic was snarled up virtually all the way back to the end of Islington High Street. I was all at sea. I really didn't know what to do. Without really thinking, I just started walking down Essex Road towards Dalston. My friend Belle lived in a flat about a mile away. I'd head there. I was walking past an alleyway when I saw a flash of a tail. It was black and thin, very different to Bob's, but I was in such a state mind my mind was playing tricks and I convinced myself it must be him. Bob! I shouted, diving into the dark space. But there was nothing there. Somewhere in the dark I heard a mewing sound. It didn't sound like him. After a couple of minutes I moved on. By now the traffic had eased off. The night suddenly fell ominously quiet. For the first time I noticed that the stars were out. It wasn't quite the Australian night sky, but it was still impressive. A few weeks ago I'd been staring at the stars in Tasmania. I told everyone in Australia that I was coming back to care for Bob. A fine job I've done of that, I said, inwardly cursing myself. For a moment or two I wondered whether my extended stay in Australia had actually been a factor in all this. At the time, a part loosened the ties between me and Bob. At the fact that I'd been absent for 6 weeks made him question my commitment to him. When the Rottweiler had attacked, and he decided that he could no longer rely on me to protect him, the thought made me want to scream. As Ballet Road zoomed into view, I was still feeling close to tears. What was I going to do without him? I'd never find a companion like Bob again. It was then that it happened. For the first time in years, I experienced an overwhelming need for a fix. I tried to bat it away immediately, but once more my subconscious started fighting a battle of wills. Somewhere inside my head, I could feel myself thinking that if I really had lost Bob, I wouldn't be able to cope. I'd have to anesthesize, baptize myself from the grief I was already feeling. Belle had, like me, been fighting for years, but I knew her flatmate still dabbled. Ah, the closer I got to her street, the more terrifying the thoughts in my head were becoming. By the time I reached Bella's house, it was approaching 10 o'clock. I had been wandering the streets for a couple of hours. In the distance, the siren were wailing once more. The cops were on their way to another stabbing or punch up in a pub. I couldn't have cared less. As I walked up the path to the dimly lit front of front entrance, I spotted a shape sitting quietly in the shadow to the side of the building. It was unmistakably the silhouette of a cat, but I'd given up hope by now and just assumed it was another stray, sheltering from the cold. But then I saw his face, that unmistakable face. Oh my God. Bob. He let out a plaintive mew, just like the one in the hallway when we first met, as if to say, "Where have you been? I've been waiting here for ages." I scooped him up and held him close. "You're going to be the death of me if you keep running away like that," I said, my mind scrambling to work out how he'd got here. It wasn't long before it all fell into place. It felt a fool for not thinking of it sooner. He had been to Bella's flat with me several times and spent 6 weeks there when I was away. It made sense that he would have come here, but how on earth had